it's very much about finding those little moments and realizing that connecting with nature doesn't have to involve like an epic adventure every time. It's great to have those bigger trips, but it could also be just connecting with nature, like in small and simple ways.
Hi, this is Danae. I'm the founder of Simple Families. Simple Families is an online community for parents who are seeking a simpler, more intentional life. In this show, we focus on minimalism with kids, positive parenting, family wellness, and decreasing the mental load. My perspectives are based in my firsthand experience raising kids, but also rooted in my PhD in child development. So you're going to hear conversations that are based in research, but more importantly, real life. Thanks for joining us. Hello, hello. That voice you heard in the intro is Linda Åkeson McGurk. You might recognize Linda's voice. She's been on the podcast before. It was way back in episode 90, simplefamilies.com/episode 90, where she told us all about her first book, There's No Such Thing as Bad Weather. And I know that she inspired myself and so many others to get our kids outside. Linda is back today to talk about her brand new book, The Open Air Life: Discover the Nordic Art of FRILUFTSLIV and Embrace Nature Every Day. She's a Swedish American who, in my last interview with her, was raising her kids here in the US, and now she's living with them in her home country of Sweden. We often hear in the news and in the media how the people in Scandinavia are so much happier, how they're leading the way in sustainability, how the kids don't start school until about 7. In many ways, it seems that the Scandinavians have a few things figured out. So I love hearing Linda's perspective on the differences between raising kids in the US and in Sweden. Not only in the differences in parenthood, but also the differences in culture. Linda teaches us all about FRILUFTSLIV. She taught me how to say it too. I'm doing my best here, which equates to open air life, something that she has grown to use as a tool to combat stress, anxiety, depression, burnout. I'm grateful to have her joining me today to talk more about this essential guide to slowing down in a modern, fast-paced society. Perhaps stepping back from our digital worlds and stepping more into the natural world. Without further ado, here's my chat with Linda. Hi, Linda. How are you?
I am great. How are you?
Good. Welcome back.
Thank you. It's been a
It's been a couple
while.
of years. Yeah. And
Yeah, at
what year
least.
did your first book come out?
It came out in 2017.
Okay.
And
So I think that's the year that you were on the podcast. I think you were one of my
yes,
first guests, actually.
yeah, I think I might have been. Yeah.
And I still have people referencing that episode and talking about your work. And I'm excited to hear all about your new book.
Yeah, I'm excited to tell you about it. It's been fun to build that community in the past 5 years, and now to follow up with this second book that sort of delves deeper into one of the topics that I wrote about in my first book.
Yeah, your first
Yeah.
book, There's No Such Thing as Bad Weather, was so
Mm.
inspiring to people all over the US in particular. But I'm curious how it was received throughout the world.
So it did really well in Eastern Europe. It sold
Mm.
well in Poland, and it also I sold the rights to Hungary and the Czech Republic, and it's sold to about 6 or 7 other countries. And I just signed a contract for China, actually, so that'll be really
Ah,
interesting to see how it goes over there. Because China, after what I've been told, they prefer sort of their own Chinese parenting experts when it comes to like parenting books, but you never know. So it'll be really interesting. It's just been sort of slow building. Some books they become bestsellers at once, but mine has been building a following over the years. So it's only gotten stronger. I think it sells just as well now as it did in the beginning. So it's just been building and building, and a lot of it is just word of mouth. My readers are posting about it, and getting excited about it, and of course I love it. It's awesome to see the impact that it's having across the
Yeah.
globe.
For those of you out there who haven't read There's No Such Thing as Bad Weather, can you give us a little summary about what that is?
Yeah, so it's basically based on my encounter, or the culture clash that I experienced when I moved from my native Sweden to the U.S., and I started a family there with my American husband, and it was just a very different. I noticed there was a very different way of raising kids, and whereas I in Sweden, nature is considered an essential part of childhood. I noticed that it was very different in Indiana, where we lived at the time. I rarely saw kids outside, and preschool was very academic, and people were almost afraid of letting their kids outside in the wintertime and the cold, which ran completely contrary to the way I'd been raised. And that sort of planted a seed for this book, and I ended up going back. I took the kids and went back to Sweden and lived there for nearly 6 months, and just to see what the contrast would be like. And the book sort of follow us on this trip, this transformative trip to Sweden, and then back to the U.S. again, and sort of compares the two different um, ways of raising kids, and yeah, and just the sort of learnings from that.
Yeah. And oh, I grew up in Ohio, so not far from Indiana. And I see a lot of that fear, but here in New York too, the fear is not just around kids going outside in the winter. There's just a lot of fear around the outdoors,
Yeah,
whether it's being afraid of ticks and Lyme disease or the West Nile
right.
virus or Zika or poison ivy or poison oak. I mean, the list could go on of all the things that we as parents find scary. And sometimes
Yeah,
the indoors feels safer. Did you
yeah.
experience that?
Oh, absolutely. And I have people contact me every week about, they want me to share things about ticks, and I just had somebody contact me about poison ivy. And that's what I use my blog for. I try to share the knowledge that I have about these things, and try and educate people on what are sort of rational fears and what are irrational fears, because there's not all of these fears are rational. Obviously there are definitely risks to going outside, but in my opinion, what I try to do is sort of equip the parents to sort of educate themselves on what the issues are and how they can prevent them, rather than feeling like they have to stay inside, because frankly that comes with its own set of risks. They may not be as palpable as a tick bite, but staying inside and not getting that sun exposure, and fresh air, and physical activity, that comes with huge risks to our
Right.
immune systems, and just physical and mental health. I think we saw that during the pandemic, when there were lockdowns, and people in some places people were barely allowed to leave their apartments, and people were like literally going crazy. And you know so there's always a different way of looking at it. Are there risks to outdoor play? Absolutely. But there are, I think, the risk of just letting ourselves get overcome by that fear. I think those risks are a lot greater. So that's kind of my message to parents.
Yeah. I had a real kind of head shaking moment when I don't even know how to describe it when I opened up your new book and I saw there is a disclaimer on the, is it the copyright page? What is that
Yeah.
page called? What is that? I mean, it literally says outdoor recreational activities are by their very nature potentially hazardous. Was that required? Like you had to put in a disclaimer in this book because people might hurt themselves after reading it?
I suppose it
I
was.
don't mean to laugh, but like
It
I was
was
just really
yeah.
surprised by that.
It's very, very American.
Right.
I've never seen that in any Swedish books about outdoor recreation.
Right.
But I did not put it in there, but I assume
Yeah.
the legal team did, because I do write about things like cold swimming and
Okay.
things like that.
Okay.
That
That
yeah,
makes sense, I guess.
yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
after I read your book, your first book, There's No Such Thing as Bad Weather, I was inspired to take a trip with my family, and we went to Norway. I've decided this is maybe a sales tactic of Scandinavian travel, is that you sell really cheap plane tickets and then charge people a fortune for everything else. Is it like that in Sweden too?
Oh, you know what? Norway is super expensive. So
Yeah.
the Norwegians who live close to the border, they come over to us to buy like groceries and beer and things like that.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so we
So,
got these really cheap plane tickets in February, and I
yeah.
really wanted to see what it was like in the winter. And so we made a trip, and we stayed in an Airbnb. We had a lovely, lovely time. But after that trip, I feel like I was for sure a believer. At the time, my daughter she was not quite yet 2, and I tried the napping outside in the frigid temperatures, and it was in fact a success. She
Yeah.
slept better in the stroller than she's ever slept before.
Yeah.
Um, but the one thing, the liability thing really stood out to me during this trip. So
Mm.
it was at the end of February, and from what we were told, we were in Oslo and in Bergen, and from what we were told was that the city is allotted a certain amount of money for salt for the roads each year, and it had run out. So there was no
Mm.
salt on the roads, there was no salt on the sidewalks, and I'm not kidding you, there were people everywhere on crutches. Like
Oh,
everyone
really?
everyone had fallen on the ice. So we
Oh
had a
my
little
God.
run-in with my daughter. She cut her face open on a table, and we had to take her to the ER, and we went to the ER, and there is the largest box I have ever seen of crutches. It's just this huge box, and people would just kind of like come and go and like take their crutches when they needed them. But for an
Oh,
American, as an American, like if you owned a shop, you would have
yeah.
to clear your sidewalk because it's a
Yeah.
liability. But there, it just seemed like it was, you take responsibility for yourself, which felt
Mm.
very different.
Yeah.
Um, and I feel like that theme it has a big impact on the way that we enjoy the outdoors, because as a result of all of the liability risks
Mm.
in the US, it's so hard to access the
Yeah.
outdoors in ways
Yeah.
that are really free.
Yeah, it is. I mean, landowners are not exactly excited about letting people on their property. If
Yeah.
you're lucky and you know somebody and they trust you, I mean, I know of that in Indiana. Where we lived in rural Indiana. There was not land that was accessible by the for the public. Like not a lot of public land. I think less than 5% in Indiana. It differs a lot from state to state. So, we were lucky to have a small acreage, but we also had some friends who had acreage. And so I always made a point to invite my kids' friends over so that they could play. And I would also ask people that I trusted or that I hope trusted me. And we ended up doing like little exchanges. In the Nordic countries, we have something called Allemansrätten, which I write about in my second book, The Open Air Life. It's the right to roam. So you can access pretty much any land aside from space like right next to a dwelling. Whether it's public or publicly owned or privately owned, doesn't matter. You have the right to walk or camp, or in Sweden, you can even light like little campfires on private property, which I know sounds outrageous and I mean to American ears, right? Um, it's very much cultural and it goes back a long time. And of course, that's shaped the way we've grown up and the way we act towards personal responsibility and liability and all that. And we also have very different laws where you can't just sue somebody in Sweden. So I think that is definitely a hurdle to outdoor recreation in the U.S. So I think in the U.S. you're a little more restricted to public land. I mean, I think there are some organizations. I think we're seeing it in the UK. I know at least where a state goes in and partners with landowners in exchange for compensation, where they allow the public to use their property as well. So I think there are some things that can be done.
We're going to pause for a 3-minute word from today's sponsors. The first sponsor today is Faherty. Faherty is all about clothing for life's best moments, whether it's a Friday night football game, the first day of school, or hanging with the family in your backyard. Faherty makes clothes that feel good and make you look good. If you've ever had a chance to pop into a Faherty store or a store that carries Faherty items, you'll quickly realize that you feel like you want to touch everything because it's so soft. Not only is their clothing high quality, but they're also passionate about craftsmanship and sustainability. In fact, many think that their clothes actually get better with age. If a soft flannel shirt sounds appealing to you this fall, look no further than Faherty. That's where I got my favorite one. Right now, Faherty is giving listeners an amazing deal. You get a full 20% off on your order. So head to fahertybrand.com/simple and use the code SIMPLE at checkout to get this deal. That's code SIMPLE at Faherty, FAHERTY brand.com/simple for 20% off. fahertybrand.com/simple. Our second sponsor for today is Indeed. If you have shied away from challenges, you probably wouldn't be the person you are today. If you need to hire someone who loves a good challenge as much as you do, you can find them fast with Indeed. Indeed is the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. You don't have to spend multiple hours on multiple job sites for candidates with the right skills. You can do it all with Indeed. In fact, during this 1 minute that I'm talking to you here about Indeed, 16 hires were made on the website. When you sponsor an Indeed post in the US, you're 3 times more likely to get a hire, according to Indeed data. My favorite part is that they keep it simple, because Indeed knows that when you're growing your own business, you have to make every dollar count. That's why with Indeed, you only pay for quality applications that match your must-have job requirement. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Visit Indeed.com/families to start hiring now. Go to Indeed.com/families. Indeed.com/families. Terms and conditions apply. Our third sponsor for today is Organifi. Organifi is a line of organic superfood blends that offers plant-based nutrition with high-quality ingredients. Each Organifi blend is science-backed to craft the most effective doses with ingredients that are organic and free of fillers. And bonus, they have less than 3 grams of sugar per serving. I've been starting my day with the Organifi red juice, which gives some energy support without caffeine. It's delicious. Just don't spill it on your white rug like I did. In the evenings, I'm also loving the Organifi Gold, which is a great way to wind down and end the day. Each of the blends is simple to use. You mix it with water or your favorite beverage on the go, and they don't compromise quality for taste. You can try out Organifi's high-quality superfoods without breaking the bank. Go to Organifi.com/simple and use the code SIMPLE for 20% off your entire order. That's Organifi.com/simple and use the code SIMPLE for 20% off your entire order. During the pandemic, we bought bike camping gear so that we could go on bike trips and camp along the way. And regrettably, we have not used it because I cannot find anywhere that we can camp because all of the trails have privately owned land next to them. So, I mean, it's possible to find public parks and state parks and that kind of thing, but it's a lot. I've spent a lot of time researching and trying to plan out a trip where just to have somewhere to pop a tent. And
Right.
I haven't been successful in doing that yet.
You haven't found any apps either? Because I know in Sweden we have an app where you can sign up, kind of like an Airbnb, but for camp space. So I was thinking maybe the US had something similar.
I'll
But
check into that. Maybe there is
yeah,
like kind of like an Airbnb for camping. I wonder.
Yeah.
That would be interesting. But yeah, it
Yeah.
feels harder, and it feels kind of like it takes up more mental space sometimes to make
Mm.
these things happen. But I'm glad to see this book, because I think you do simplify it in a way that sometimes people like me tend to overcomplicate spending time in nature.
Right. Yeah. I mean, sometimes it's as easy as just, just sleeping on the porch. Like I do that with my kids sometimes. That was something that we did in Indiana a lot when they were little. And just being able to go out and like see the Milky Way and um, going to sleep under those stars. That's a nature experience too. You're not in the wilderness, you're outside your home, but it's a very simple way of experiencing nature in everyday life. And I think what Friluftsliv is, which is what my book is about, that it's very much about finding those little moments and realizing that connecting with nature doesn't have to involve like an epic adventure every time. It's great to have those bigger trips, but it could also be just connecting with nature, like in small and simple ways.
So that does that translate into open air life?
It literally translates to free air life, but
Okay.
the translation that is more commonly used is open air.
So you call it a culturally learned rhythm, which I thought was a
Mm-hmm.
really good way of explaining it, because it's not
Yeah.
necessarily something you do. It is, or is it something you do, or do you feel like it's just more a way of being?
I think it's a way of being. I mean, when you think of it at first, you might think of the activities like, foraging for berries or cross country skiing or going hiking or camping, um, cold swimming. I mean, you name it, there are all kinds of outdoor activities, right? But Friluftsliv is more, it is about, it's a philosophy. It's also, uh, it's about being gentle on the earth. So it has that whole sort of environmental ethos as well that comes with it. And I mean, it is cultural because it's something that's only been around for less than 200 years is when it really appeared. And it
Tell us
was
how it started. I thought that was
yeah,
fascinating.
yeah. So essentially, it was a reaction against industrialization and industrialization, which led to urbanization and modernization. People, and this is, I mean, nearly, when you think about it now, it's like this is nearly 200 years ago, and people were already feeling like they had to get away from the noise and the stress and the traffic and the crowds. It kind of started in the upper classes of society. So it was the intellectuals and the artists who sort of romanticized nature. And they saw this sort of open air life as a way of good health and a way to live well. And get away from all the negative effects of industrialization. So they started going on excursions like to the countryside. And then this sort of took hold, and the government realized that this was great for like preventive public health, right? All the fresh air, people were outside getting all this exercise, and so the government started to promote it as well. And then workers started to get more time off with, there were labor reforms. So people had, they had a day off every week. So for a while there, free time was synonymous, more or less, with friluftsliv or open air life, because that's what people did like in their free time.
Yeah, I found it fascinating that it wasn't the farmers and the hunters and the people who were naturally connected to nature
Right.
that really started this. It was people
Hmm.
like me who maybe weren't born into a life
Yeah.
like that, but found a way to it.
Yeah, because they were all outside all the time. They didn't really like need
Mhm.
it, quote unquote, because they were already working the land. They were getting all the nature connection that they needed. But it was the people in the cities who were removed from nature. They felt they felt the need to
So the
reconnect.
government marketed it kind of like an intervention for these people in the cities?
Yeah, they did that by creating like a national park system,
Okay.
for example, and creating local parks and trails where people could exercise. They started like summer camps for kids in the cities, and some of that, I mean, lives on to this day, like with the summer camps, for example. And so yeah, and it was also promoted. There was another reason why it was promoted by the government, and that is that a defense, like national defense. We very much have a people's defense here in Sweden. We're so small, so the government needed for the population to be strong and healthy, and Friluftsliv was, the way to achieve that through cross country skiing and hiking, and that kept people in shape and strong and ready to defend the
Mhm.
country. So yeah, so the government was definitely they had a vested interest, and to this day they continue to support it through the school curriculum, for example, open air life or friluftsliv, like different friluftsliv activities are part of the national curriculum, both for the preschool and for grade school. So the kids have special like days throughout the school year where they do like orienteering, for example. So all kids here learn how to read a map and like navigate with a I guess the younger kids don't use a compass, but they learn how to read a map. And they have days when they might go like skiing or ice skating and things like that. So it's worked into the curriculum, and it's also a way that the government they see it as a way to educate people about environmental issues too. So yeah, so it's all part of that.
As you're now a full-time resident of Sweden and your girls are going to school in Sweden, are they both teenagers?
They are 11 and 14. So I
Oh,
have a
wow.
tween and a teen.
So tell me a little bit about what you've seen, maybe just your anecdotal comparisons of the outdoors with teenagers in the US and in Sweden. And do you feel like in Sweden you're facing a lot of the same challenges around screen time and phone use and that kind of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not gonna sit here and say that my kids, because we live in Sweden, uh, always want to go outside rather than sit and be on their various screens, because it's not. But I think what the open air life offers and what makes it easier for us here is that there's kind of a support system. I don't know. I always say that it takes a village to raise an outdoor child, and I think that applies to all ages, really. Um, I think it's just so much easier when you have the support from parents and grandparents and preschool and school. So it's still like the schools, they make them go outside for recess, and like I said, open air life is worked into the curriculum in different ways. But of course in their free time, yeah, they want to be on TikTok and their Snapchat and whatnot. So then it's mostly up to me as a parent to create a good balance. And there's also, I mean, what I see here, I think my kids do have maybe probably a little more freedom and opportunities to enjoy that type of lifestyle. And this is cultural too, but like my kids will sometimes they'll go camp with their friends like on their own, and I don't know that they would have maybe had that freedom in the US. So that's definitely a little different. um,
Yeah, you can't even run
yeah,
in you can't even leave your kid in the car to go into the post office here.
yeah.
But
Yeah.
pretty
Right.
sure you're not allowed to send your kids camping on their own, but, I
Yeah.
guess it just all depends on the region. But yeah,
Yeah.
I think that parental fear, um, it is strong. And my
Yeah.
I have my daughter's 6 and my son is 8, And she likes to wander. Like, she definitely is a natural
Yeah.
born wanderer. And she does wander in our neighborhood. I let her walk to a friend's house, but it's probably like 3 houses away, probably maybe 2/10 of
Yeah.
a mile. And there's been a handful of people who have stopped them, kind of like, what are you doing? Like,
Really?
did you escape? You're not supposed
Wow.
to be out here. But then there's also people that cheer them on. I've had people walk by and like, oh, is that your daughter? Like, it's so great to see kids out by themselves. It's nice
Good.
to be able to give her that freedom, and we're in a
Yeah.
space that's safe for it. But at the same time, I do think the public perception is very strong and divisive. There are some people who support it
Yeah.
and some people who don't.
Right. It's hard because you don't want to be judged as, being for like neglecting your kids, and then that some people could easily get that impression when all you're trying to do is give them healthy freedom and responsibility. So
Yeah. Yeah. And it is a lot of opportunity for them to experience a little taste of freedom within limits. And I think
yeah,
they really can grow. And I think it sounds really
yeah,
cool to be able to camp by themselves. I bet they
yeah,
love that.
yeah. They do. And my youngest one, she's 11. We just went up north actually and just climbed the tallest mountain in Sweden.
That's
And
incredible.
I was so excited and surprised that she wanted to go. I was hoping that she wanted to, but it was her. The thing is, it was her idea to get up on this peak. I'm not usually one to push for things like that. I'm perfectly happy just doing any trail. But what I've noticed with my kids as they get older is that it's become more important to them to have like a specific goal. They want to see something specific, or they want to climb a peak, or yeah, have a specific destination, or they're less into the wandering. So I think, it's interesting to see as they get older how our relationship with nature and how we enjoy open air life, how it sort of uh, changes a little bit, and there are ebbs and flows too. I remember when I was a teenager, being out in nature was not my not something I did like all the time. Like I drifted away from it for a few years, but then having been raised in this culture, it came back to me. And I think deep inside, I always knew that it would. It was just a matter of time. But, there for a few years, yeah, like it's all about like boys or, yeah, gaining independence. And you're thinking about like, yeah, your future. And there's just so much going on. But I think nature, it's great to have that nature connection for them to fall back on, because I know how valuable it is for mental health. And especially, I think about my oldest daughter who's 14. At that age, they're so vulnerable. And when you look at depression and anxiety, and we don't know exactly how that correlates to screen use, but researchers have seen a link between the heaviest screen users, and that there is an increased risk for like poor sleep and anxiety, depression in teenage girls. So to me, that makes it even more important to make sure that my daughter still has that connection.
Yeah. So you also mentioned that you were not a nature expert or a hardcore adventurer going into this journey with your kids. Do you find that other parents in Sweden are getting their kids out at the same rate as you are, with the same passion that you are, even if they're not experts themselves?
I think I'm probably maybe a little more passionate than the average parent. And I think, just my experience with having lived in the US and how I got into like writing
Yeah.
books and everything has made me more into it. But it is a very common thing. Like most people have that sort of basic outdoor knowledge, like, how to make up fire and like cook outside, or yeah, just it's a very common way of going outside here. I've been starting to challenge myself more just because I've noticed that I enjoy it. So, for example, I did a winter camping challenge with a friend of mine, and so we've been sleeping outside for at least one night every month for an
that's
entire
fun.
year. And yeah, you're not going to see every Swede like out there in a in a tent in January, but the everyday nature connection, just like going for walks around your neighborhood, that's definitely I'd say when you look at the statistics, like more than 90% of the people here do take part in that kind of outdoor. So that's very commonplace. Yeah.
So you do differentiate between everyday friluftsliv, weekend, I'm going to try to say it 3 times now, weekend friluftsliv and vacation friluftsliv. Did I butcher that?
Yeah.
Was that
No,
okay?
no, no.
So tell us a little bit about how those look different in your life.
Yeah. So the everyday friluftsliv could be, those are the things that are easy for you to do in your everyday life. So that might look a little different for each person. We live near a lake, so for us, a lot of times it could be just going down to the lake, going for a swim after school, or yeah, like the most common way of doing it weekdays would be to just enjoy your own backyard if you have one, or going for like a walk in the neighborhood to maybe just do things like, maybe in the spring, like listening to the birds that have come back from migration, or look for signs of spring, or pick some berries if you live near the woods. And then on the weekends, you have time to plan for maybe you'll drive to a park somewhere and cook a meal with friends. Something that takes a little more planning and is a little more overwhelming that you can't do during a work day. And then vacation friluftsliv, yeah, that's kind of what I was talking about with me and my daughter going far north of the Arctic Circle and like climbing this mountain top, something that you might do once or twice a year. Trying to go to like a really wild place if you can, one where you really get away from civilization and all those stressors, because that's really when you can relax the most, is when you get away from the traffic and the crowds and the noise.
I
Yeah.
love that. There were some examples in your book that made me smile of things that would be considered very unusual here, like the HR man who does job interviews in a canoe. That kind of thing. I love it because it's just why not? Got Wi-Fi, why not?
I realize that, and that's why I wanted to highlight some of those
Yeah.
examples. It's just a different way of doing things.
Right. And
Mm.
tell us about the bird and moose extravaganza on the radio.
Yeah, so a few years ago, like people are very infatuated with nature, also as entertainment. Like, so even when you're indoors here, nature plays a great role, and nature programming is very popular on both on the radio and TV. So for the past few years, we've had this radio show where it goes on for, oh gosh, I can't remember how many hours now, but it's like all night. This bird song bonanza with it occurs in this every spring, and it's basically just a way of celebrating the return of the migratory birds, and they have cameras, or they have microphones like set up at these different bird watching locales, like across, like all over the country, and they have commentators who are talking about the different birds, and there are hundreds of thousands of people who listen to this show. And I think I compared it to too. Like it's like more popular than the Oscars and something else like in the U.S. combined. And there's also a TV show um, called The Great Moose Migration, and that's all that does is like following this herd of moose. And most of the time, there's absolutely nothing going on. There's just these cameras that have been set up in the woods, and if you're lucky, you might see a bird fly by or some ice flows, and then the big, culmination of this show is when the herd of moose, when they cross this river, just just like they have for thousands of years. But that really became huge during the pandemic when a lot of people were at home working from home, and they just kind of had it on in the background. It was very just calming and relaxing, I think, to just sort of, you're inside, but at the same time you can bring nature in by having that sort of on in the background. And if you're lucky, you might get to see a moose.
Yeah, it sounds beautiful. I mean, if you're gonna put music on in the background, why not play some bird songs? I think that
Yeah.
I love that
Mhm.
idea. Never thought about it, but maybe I'll try that. There's got to be a Spotify channel for that, right?
Right.
One of the things that I enjoyed reading about was the different forms of walking. That in Sweden, you have so many different types of walks that you take. That is
Hmm.
interesting to me because in Spanish, there's a couple different words for walks too. That's the only other language that I speak. But in
Yeah.
English, we just say, I'm going to go for a walk or I'm walking.
Hmm.
But it really does
Right.
kind of expand when you think about all these different types of walks. It does expand the the sort of the recreational aspect of it a lot.
Yeah. 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 I just got to think of it when I started writing the book. I was like, a lot of open air life, it really revolves around walking. And actually, we use the term strolling even because, and I think there's a slight difference because strolling implies that it's
Mm.
something that is done for joy and it's very leisurely, and it's not at all like I felt like in the US I never knew how to there's walking, but then there's also hiking, right?
Mhm.
And those two feel different to me. But hiking doesn't exactly represent what I do in like an open air life most of the time. Like it can be, but hiking to me is like, okay, then you gotta pack a backpack and you gotta drive somewhere, and it's like preferably some exotic location, and you gotta have a map and compass, and
Gotta worry about
and
getting
it's
lost.
and it's like this big thing. But we would probably just call that like a forest walk most of the time. uh, and so yeah, we have like a stroller walk, for example, and that's if you're a new parent, then that's what you do with other parents. Typically, when you're on your parental leave, you go on a stroller walk. Um, so then, of course, you have to choose terrain that's like stroller friendly. And there's like a moonlight walk when you walk in the moonlight, which I can highly recommend. There's something magical about doing that. And yeah, evening walk would be one of the most common ways for me to get outside, like during the work week. Like it's what you do maybe after dinner and often after dark. And there are quite a few others as well. I think the number, like just the variety of, in that vocabulary, it just mirrors how big a part of our lives that it is, this sort of everyday walking. And part of that, of course, is being able to access trails pretty much anywhere too. I mean, obviously that helps.
Yeah. I know a lot of people listening are going to feel inspired to get outside more, especially with their families. And many are going to encounter some resistance from their kids. And we had a
Mhm.
travel episode this summer, and I talked a little bit in that episode about how when you're envisioning a vacation, you should not just envision sort of like the dream version of it, like everyone's going to be happy and
Mhm.
smiling and everyone's going to get along the whole time. And I kind of feel like that about an outdoor adventure, right? I always envision
Yeah.
this could go great and this could be really hard. There could be a lot of whining.
Yeah.
There will probably be a lot of whining. And then that helps me kind of to rein in my expectations of what this experience is going to look like. Because usually when I'm outside with my family, it looks a lot like when we're inside, where we're just normal people with everyday hurdles. And it's not necessarily this like romp in the meadow with joy and flower crowns. What is
Yeah.
your experience getting kids outside and resistance? Speak a little bit to that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's classic. I find, and I think that's a great way to deal with it, to really manage your expectations and not to have, with like little kids, to not have a certain distance or destination or goal in mind. With little kids, I think it's easier to just follow their lead. Like, you take them to a place where that you like, where you like to be, but don't like push too much to get to a certain spot. If you just kind of let kids uh, play freely, that's where you have, like the best chances of success. And I think we can all relate to the, kids not wanting to go outside when it's not 70 degrees and sunny. Like,
And parents not
let's
wanting to
face
go
it.
outside in the
Yeah,
70,
parents.
right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't always want to go outside when it's, yeah, when the weather is challenging. Since, yeah, I have to say it's challenging, since the title of my book is "There's no such thing as bad weather," so I can't say bad. But um, I think consistency is key there, to just have, like we talked about rhythm earlier, to make open air life, to make it a rhythm, of like a family rhythm, and make it part of your everyday life. So to make time for it every day, and don't make too big of a deal out of it. Just have it be part of your routine, so that the kids get used to it, and then um, they will come to expect it. Yeah, and you will reap the benefits later. You will.
Yeah.
It is worth it. It is worth it. But it's not. I'm the first to say that it's not always easy.
Yeah. Especially
It's
when we
not.
live in a climate where everything is really temperature controlled. Here in New York, it gets
Mm,
cold in the winter and hot in the summer. So our houses are pretty much 100% sealed. So when you're inside,
mm.
you're really inside. Like there's no screens on the windows. We very rarely open the windows here.
Yeah.
We use air conditioning, we use heat blown in. So I think that when you're
Mm,
existing so much of the time in a space like this, going outside can be very uncomfortable. The wind, the
yeah.
ice, the rain, all of it. And many of our kids are really accustomed to spending a lot of time indoors
Mm,
in those same
yeah.
conditions. I don't know. I think in other parts of the world where the climate's a little bit more mild, we just spent a month in Mexico, and a lot of people have outdoor living rooms. Completely, their
Yeah.
house is basically outdoor, and that
Right.
it's just so much. Even though you could be in the city, you really are in the open air all the time, and
Yeah.
I think you're desensitized a little bit to the sensory overwhelm that is the outdoors.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're right, and I think the contrast is also pretty stark. Like I was always fascinated by how cold American homes are in the summertime. We don't use air conditioning here in Sweden that much. It's starting to become more common because the climate. I mean, let's face it, the climate is heating up, and we are starting to experience summers that we never have here, like much hotter than they used to be. So some people are putting in air conditioning now, um, but the normal way of going about, cooling the house in the summer is just to open all the all the windows and doors, basically. But when I moved to the U.S., I thought it was fascinating that it was just so cold inside.
Yeah.
I mean, I get it. Like Indiana, where I live, was like super hot and humid in the summer, and I yeah I mean, we needed that AC, but but we kept the temperature pretty high, I think, by American standards, because otherwise, I want to be able to go in and out without having to put
A sweater
a
on.
sweater on when I
Yeah.
go inside,
Yeah.
But
Yeah, yeah. So it's uncomfortable, I think, the idea of
yeah,
just going outside and dealing
yeah,
with whatever nature brings on any
yeah,
given day. And if it's uncomfortable for us as adults, I think we have to acknowledge that it might be uncomfortable for our kids too. I
yeah,
think some kids are
right.
much more open to it than others, and others
Hmm.
it's a different, harder experience for them.
Yeah,
And it might take a little bit more time for them to adjust, and they might need smaller, more approachable increments.
yeah. I think, going about it in baby steps is
Hmm.
always a good idea. But I mean, we're seeing in the US now too, there are a lot of nature preschools popping up. And at
Yeah,
those
there
schools,
are.
the kids are dressed for the elements, and they are outside most of the day. And
Yeah.
so,
I can't imagine the
uh,
liability forms that come with
yeah.
those preschools. When we
Yeah.
were in Mexico, my daughter did an aerial silks class, and she was like 2 stories high, and we didn't have to sign a
Yeah.
waiver. And I just kind of was thinking about, like, in the US, we sign a waiver
Yeah.
for chapstick. Like, if we have to put
Yeah.
chapstick or sunscreen on our
Yeah.
kids at summer camp.
Yeah.
So, but,
I know.
despite that,
Mm.
I do think it's really incredible that these forest schools really are thriving.
Mhm. They
And you're
are.
right, there are, compared to even 5 years ago, I think there are so many more. It's really promising.
Yeah.
It's
They
really
and
cool.
I remember when my kids were little, there were about a handful in the entire country, and now at the last count, which was I think a couple of years ago, there were nearly 600.
Wow.
And this children and nature movement has really taken off, and it's just amazing to see. It gives me so much hope. I'm very excited to see it. Like, so many people are realizing the benefits of having their kids outside and being outside themselves too. Just look at all the lifestyle diseases of today, and being outside and being active outside can prevent all those.
I think that your work has hugely contributed, especially to the growth of the forest schools and getting kids outside here in the US. So thank you for all that you've done.
That was my hope when I wrote the book, and I'm excited to see where it's all headed. Yeah,
Yeah, and
it's great.
congratulations on this new one. I think everyone's going to enjoy
Yeah,
this one too.
thank you.
Tell us a little bit about where we can find you online for anyone that wants to get in touch.
Yeah, so I still write my blog, rainorShineMama.com, and I'm also active on Facebook and Instagram. If you want to see a little more behind the scenes, I share a little more from my personal life on Instagram. So, and also some tips and tricks when it comes to open air life. So, some outdoor recipes, and just like practical advice, like how to start a fire. And
Yeah, well, thank you. I'm going to put the links to those and your books in the show notes. I appreciate it. Thank you for your time today, Linda.
thank you, Danae. Always a pleasure.
Thanks so much for tuning into this episode. If you want the links to the things that Linda and I talked about today, go to simplefamilies.com/episode 330. As always, I appreciate you tuning in, and I'm glad you're here.